there's a defining moment in every man's life, a silent, gut-wrenching realization, where the illusions he's built his life upon begin to crumble. He looks at the very things he once chased with relentless devotion. Love, companionship, the dream of a shared future with someone who whispers promises of connection and understanding. And then the thought creeps in, what if it was all a beautifully packaged lie?
Arthur Schopenhauer didn't just pose this uncomfortable question. He dismantled the entire romantic narrative with ruthless precision. He stared straight into the cold mechanics of human desire and refused to flinch. To him, romance wasn't salvation. It was seduction in its most dangerous form, a well-disguised trap. What society glorifies as love, Schopenhauer called illusion. What people celebrate as intimacy, he exposed as biology dressed up in poetic fantasy. And what most think of as connection, he unmasked as suffering in disguise. For Schopenhauer, the gap between man and woman wasn't just physical, it was existential. Man, he argued, is drawn toward ideals. Philosophy, creativity, discovery. Woman, on the other hand, he saw as rooted in the immediate, the practical, the instinctual urge for survival. In his blunt observation, women remain children their whole lives, forever tied to the present moment, unable or unwilling to see beyond the surface. For him, this wasn't an insult but a biological observation, a lens into nature's core design. And beauty, Schopenhauer viewed it as nothing more than a mask, a biological lure meant to disarm, distract, and ultimately capture a man's reason. To him, feminine beauty wasn't a gift to mankind. It was nature's bait. It existed not to inspire but to manipulate, to drag a man away from his higher pursuits and turn him into a servant to his own urges. And history proves him right again and again. Men who've built empires, shaped civilizations, fought wars for ideals, they rarely fell to armies or ideologies. More often, they fell to a voice soft enough to stir their heart and hands delicate enough to break their resolve. Schopenhauer believed women, unable to shape the external world by force or philosophy, mastered a quieter battlefield, emotional influence. Their power didn't lie in armies or politics. It lived in bedrooms, kitchens, and in the subtle manipulation of a man's deepest instincts. While men built the structures of civilization, women shaped the men building them, not through violence, but through charm, affection, need, and unspoken expectation. Yet society romanticizes this dynamic. It wraps it in flowery language, calls it love, frames it as sacred. But to Schopenhauer, it was transactional at best, a biological imperative wearing the mask of poetry and vows. Love, he wrote, was never about destiny or a meeting of souls. It was a calculated trick, a blind, mechanical force embedded deep within us, designed to ensure the survival of the species. Your peace of mind, your happiness, your personal ambitions, irrelevant to nature's agenda. The only thing that mattered was reproduction. And to achieve this, nature plays dirty. It fills your heart with longing, your mind with fantasies, and your eyes with illusions, convinces you that she's different, that this time it's real. And by the time you finally understand the truth, you're already neck-deep in surrender. For Schopenhauer, marriage was not a sacred bond, but the final nail in a man's coffin. A legally binding illusion, signed in hope, paid for in regret. He believed that the moment a man gave in to beauty's spell and believed in love's promise, he stopped being free. Marriage wasn't about love, it was nature's strategy to lock down reproduction. And the man, now emotionally blinded, was reduced to a laborer, working not for glory or purpose but to sustain a machine that drained him day after day. And what happens when beauty fades? When the enchantment wears off? What remains is often a hollow silence, creeping resentment, and the realization that the freedom he once had, the space to think, to build, to wander, was replaced with routine, obligation, and the slow erosion of his spirit. Schopenhauer wrote, "Marriage is a trap laid by nature, the will to live, disguised in sweet illusion, and the bait, a woman's smile, her softness, her promise of connection. But beneath it all, survival, reproduction, biological programming. This wasn't hatred toward women. It was a warning to men. Women, in his eyes, weren't villains, they were agents of nature, acting unconsciously in line with their survival imperatives. Their goal wasn't malice. It was security for themselves and their future children. And to achieve this, Schopenhauer claimed women evolved to become experts in emotional persuasion. Not warriors of logic or strength, but masters of intuition, subtlety, and social maneuvering. And this, he warned, is where most men lose. Not because they're weak, but because they're unprepared. They bring logic to a battle fought with instinct. They reason where they should resist. In this silent war, men become pawns. They build the house, but it's no longer theirs. They chase careers, but the fruits go to someone else. They dream big, but those dreams are slowly shrunk under the weight of responsibility. And through it all, men convince themselves this is fulfillment, that this sacrifice is noble, that this is what a man does. But deep down, many carry a quiet grief, a voice they haven't heard in years, a fire that's long since gone cold, a version of themselves buried under years of compromise. Schopenhauer's warning wasn't aimed at women. It was directed at men's blindness, their romantic delusions, their failure to understand the true dynamics of attraction and the cost it often carries. The tragedy isn't that men love. It's that they love blindly, that they give their soul to a fantasy they never pause to question, that they mistake desire for destiny and seduction for sincerity. And when the illusion crumbles, it's not just broken hearts left behind, but broken lives. Schopenhauer's brilliance wasn't in bitterness. It was in brutal clarity. He stripped away the flowery narratives and exposed the primal forces underneath, the raw biological scripts that pull our strings whether we acknowledge them or not. He never saw men as oppressors, but as victims of their own longing. Men, by their nature, are thinkers, builders, creators. They shape civilizations, write philosophy, push the boundaries of science and art. But all of that, all their progress and potential, can collapse the moment they surrender to unchecked desire. Because once a man falls under the spell, he no longer serves his mission. He starts living for her approval. He twists his values to gain her affection. He reshapes himself into something softer, more agreeable, more lovable, and in doing so, he forgets who he is. And to Schopenhauer, that was the greatest tragedy of all. Not a loss of status, wealth, or power, but the betrayal of the self. What value is there in a man who's lost his own identity? What happens to his soul when he stops living for truth and starts chasing validation? Schopenhauer observed that most men aren't broken by war, or poverty, or hardship, but by love. Or more precisely, by the illusion of love. By dependency dressed up as romance. And this, he argued, is where women hold their deepest unconscious power, not through force, but through emotional need. Through presence, through charm, through silence. They rarely demand a man's loyalty, he offers it. They seldom beg for his sacrifice, he volunteers it. And so begins the slow decline. First goes the time he once gave to his purpose. Then the passion for his craft. Then the solitude that once birthed his ideas. One by one, the pillars fall until the man who once stood tall now kneels. Not in love, but in quiet resignation. His purpose becomes maintenance. His joy becomes avoidance. His dreams shrink until they fit neatly inside the walls of comfort he's built for someone else. And society applauds this. They call it maturity, responsibility, even love. But Schopenhauer dared to ask, what if this isn't growth at all? What if it's slow-motion surrender? What if the man who gives up his fire isn't evolving, but disappearing? To Schopenhauer, the truly awakened man sees through the illusion. He doesn't hate women. He understands their nature. He doesn't reject love, but he recognizes it for what it is, a force to respect, not worship. And above all, he guards his soul against the lies that dress themselves up as happiness. This isn't a call to isolation, but to awareness. To pause and ask, am I still the man I was meant to be? Or have I become someone else? Just to keep the peace? To gain attention? To enjoy fleeting comfort? Schopenhauer's voice isn't one of anger. It's a quiet, relentless truth. A call echoing across generations, reminding men to wake up, before it's too late. In his philosophy, the highest version of man isn't the lover, or the husband, or even the warrior, it's the thinker, the philosopher, the one who sees the game and chooses not to play, the man who turns from the noise, the seduction, and the applause, and instead faces the vast, uncomfortable silence within. For only in detachment, he believed, can a man be free. Only by releasing the lie that fulfillment lies in others can a man begin to truly understand himself. Schopenhauer pointed to history's greatest minds, the Stoics, the sages, the monks, the philosophers, men who walked alone. Not because they were unloved, but because they refused to trade their peace for temporary affection. They saw through the grand illusion. They chose wisdom over warmth, clarity over comfort, and in that solitude they found a different kind of power, not the kind that rules others, but the kind that reclaims the self. This path isn't for everyone. Most will reject it. Society will label it cold, detached, bitter. But Schopenhauer never wrote for the masses. He wrote for the few, for the men ready to see, for the ones who've suffered enough to finally ask. Why? For the men who've chased love, lost themselves, and now seek something real. Not comfort, not validation, but truth. And the truth is this: a man who doesn't understand his desires is a slave to them. A man who doesn't understand women is at their mercy. And a man who builds his identity on romantic promises will watch that identity collapse when those promises fail. Schopenhauer challenges every man. Are you awake? Or are you still dreaming someone else's dream? This isn't a rejection of love. It's a call to love differently, to love your mind, your mission, the stillness that speaks when everything else falls quiet. Because the man who can sit alone with no craving, no ache, no longing, that is the man who cannot be controlled. That is the man who is truly free. So if this stirred something deep inside you, if it felt uncomfortably true, don't run from it. Sit with it. Let it burn away the illusions you've been gripping for far too long. Let it strip you of every falsehood you were told about love, happiness, and what makes a man whole. You weren't born to live in chains disguised as comfort. You weren't meant to die in a life built on compromise. You were made to see, to stand alone if you must, to rise not because someone asked you to, but because you remembered who you are. Let Schopenhauer's harsh truth be your mirror. Not to hate the world, but to stop being fooled by it. And once you see clearly, you never unsee. If this message hit something deep in you, if it made you think, don't let it stop here. Like this video, share it with someone else who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more content that speaks to your mind, not just your mood. And if you want to help keep this message alive, consider joining the channel or checking the support link in the description, because the truth will set you free. But first, it will shatter everything you thought you knew.